Welcome to Nobilis Erotica, the best science fiction and fantasy erotica podcast in the known universe. This week's story: straightish, alien, tentacular, telepathic sex. This is episode 447. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. This episode of Nobilis Erotica is sponsored by the generous patronage of Nobilis Erotica listeners. To help out paying the authors and voices that create these stories, visit patreon.com/Nobilis. The September patron-funded story is A Certain Tantarii by Andra Dill. When not daydreaming about plot lines and characters, Andra practices yoga, reads voraciously, and drinks too much coffee. She loves road trips and going off on wild tangents. Andra writes in multiple genres, including but not limited to urban fantasy, steamy romance, paranormal romance, and horror. Follow her on Twitter as @AEDill and Instagram as Andra Dill Author. Our narrator this month is Scottie Calif. She graced us with her voice back in episode 425 and is also the narrator for my steampunk noir collection, Free Spire Nights, available on Audible. Here we go.
Everything hinged on Eva getting control of her mental shield. It wouldn't bode well if, during today's negotiations, one of her erotic fantasies featuring the client popped up. Her career as a conduit would be over. Eva paced around the conference room muttering, "Steady, professional, focus." Her shield would hold. It would. She came from a long line of tactile telepaths, and creating a mental containment sphere came as easily to her as breathing. On a normal day, all Eva's thoughts, dreams, and internal dialogue ebbed and flowed like the tide, cocooned within a secure barrier, leaving her working mind space free to facilitate communication between an interstellar resources employee and a client. Today wasn't normal. Eva's eyes strayed to the electric blue walls surrounding her. The nerve-jarring blue made her skin twitch. She pulled at the collar of her blouse and rolled her neck. Steady, professional, focus. The IR representative, Arjun, and the Tantarii delegates were meeting about rhodium shipments, for pity's sake. Dull as watching scorpius grass grow. Keeping herself awake would normally be the biggest concern. The source of her agitation originated with a certain Tantarii male, Nadish. Pulse quickening, her clit throbbed. A fresh wave of images deluged her. A thick tentacle gliding up her inner thigh. No! Steady, professional, focus. Eva crossed her arms and, in an unconscious attempt to quell her jittering nerves, hugged herself. In her 7 years working at Interstellar Resources, Eva had never been so viscerally affected when connecting with another. Nadish disrupted her equilibrium, and the loss of his touch at the end of yesterday's session had unmoored her. She found some solace knowing she wasn't the only one unnerved by Nadish. Arjun, director for Antares Quadrant, had lost control of yesterday's session. It boggled her mind how Nadish and Govad, the other Tantarii, had shifted the focus of the talks from rhodium shipments to building a new docking station near Shaula. After yesterday's grueling negotiations, Eva had fled to her quarters to recover, only to have Nadish invade her imagination and follow her into her dreams. Now her thoughts catapulted around as if the walls of her shield were a trampoline. Dream fragrance bombarded her, vying for attention. Steady, professional, focus. Eva repeated the mantra, but the words didn't dampen the chaos within her. Her mental shield felt as wobbly as a new foal's legs. For the first time in her life, she worried about her ability. She needed to quiet her mind. Her eyes tracked back to the vividly colored walls, and she cringed. The room needed something a little less agitating. Eva crossed to the components case by the entry. She snatched up the design control module and studied the aesthetics program. Scrolling through the tranquil subset, she found exactly what she needed. The four walls flickered, flaring briefly to a blinding white, then the pink gold of dawn washed over them. Much better. Eva leaned her hip against a rose quartz table and, twirling a strand of her tightly curled black hair around her index finger, admired the calming view. Unbidden, another dream fragment swamped her mind. Her hair gripped by one tentacle, her head pulled back sharply, another tentacle teasing the arch of her throat. Nadish's beak-like mouth nipping her shoulder. Heart hammering, Eva jackknifed up. Calm. She needed to calm her churning thoughts, now, before Arjun and the Tantaris arrived. She sped through more options on the module. Maybe some soothing white noise. She tapped the screen. One dawn-colored wall morphed into a creek bed with multicolored, smooth-edged stones. The gentle sound of the water tumbling over the stones filled the room. Steady, professional, focus. When her heart rate halved and no more dreamscapes came, Eva pulled out a chair. She blew out a shaky breath and collapsed onto the cushioned seat. Slipping off her shoes, she shifted around until she comfortably sat cross-legged. Another deep breath, then another. She turned her attention inward. Methodically, she checked her mental sphere for any fissures, shoring up her mental barrier so not even a whisper of want or desire could slip out. A waft of fragrance, spicy and devastating, tickled Eva's nose. Her shell wavered, but held. In her research on Tantari society, she'd read passing references to the pleasant aroma of the males. Vanilla, flowers, mint, those were pleasing odors. The dangerous scent of Nadish promised sweat-slicked bodies, fever-pitched cries, and mind-shredding passion. She battled the wild impulse to rub against Nadish and purr like a satisfied cat. So unprofessional. Nadish politely tapped her shoulder. Steady, professional, focus. She turned to smile at him. Wide-set, green-gray eyes, nearly the size of her palm, studied her. His facial muscles quivered. Was he trying to smile? A barely there thick neck connected his bulbous head to a broad chest. 2 6-foot-long arms extended laterally from his upper chest, and 6 inches below them 2 equally lengthed tentacles protruded. Beneath his waist, another pair of arms and tentacles flowed down. She'd read that the distinction between Tantari arms and tentacles lay in the position of retractable suckers. Tentacles only had them on their tips. Tantari arms contained dozens, spaced along their length. Nothing in her studies prepared her for the experience of those fusion points. Eva flushed, recalling the sensation of miniature mouths kissing her flesh. Nadish's skin, patterned with dark swirls of blue and green, melding into ebony, glinted beneath the room's artificial lighting. Yesterday, she'd mistaken the iridescent sheen of his skin for moisture and had anticipated his touch to be cool and perhaps slimy? Oh, so wrong. Uncrossing her legs, she hastily slipped on her shoes. With a mixture of eager anticipation and nervousness, Eva extended her goosebump-laden arm. His arm twined up and around hers like a green vine climbing a trellis. It glided beneath her loose shirt sleeve to grip her bicep. Between the coils of Nadish's arm, she caught glimpses of her own tawny brown skin. Eva curled her fingers around him, enjoying the warmth radiating from his satin-smooth skin far too much. She felt a slight vibration as the suckers bloomed open. Her stomach swooped when they adhered to her sensitive flesh. A vision of them climbing to more tender parts seared her private mind. "Professional," Eva growled to herself before opening to him. "Are you well, Eva?" His voice, deep and resonant as a Gregorian chant, filled her mind. "No, I'm exhausted. I spent half the night dreaming of you and the other half tossing and turning. And I'm stressed because if I accidentally flash you or Arjun with an image of my erotic dreams, I can kiss my job goodbye." "Yes, thank you. And you?" "Very well." Nadish snagged a stool and pulled it alongside her. The padded seat resembled a mutated Western saddle of old, with not one but 3 pommels to cradle and support the Tantarii body. He eased down onto it. Eva drummed her unencumbered fingers on the tabletop and stared at the soothing dawn-colored wall. She glanced at Nadish, then away. Better to keep her eyes straight ahead, calm and soothing. "I've never worked with a conduit before. I was amazed to hear both yours and Arjun's words in my own language. I'm curious. How does it work?" She huffed out a laugh. "I'd like to give you a scientific explanation, but I can't." She shrugged. "I'm a polyglot. I hear a language and click." She snapped her fingers. "My brain translates it. My telepathy is touch-based, so when I connect, skin to skin, everyone connected to me understands each other. A conduit's brain acts as a hub to facilitate conversation between 2 or 3 people. Multiple contacts were taxing, but doable. Other businesses rely on technology to translate. Interstellar Resources does in some areas, too, but with every technological advantage, someone figures out a way to hack in and manipulate translations. It's a risk IR won't take in key negotiations." The irony that her company prided itself as the preeminent artificial intelligence designers and software engineers in the galaxy wasn't lost on her. "You're from Earth 2? "I am, but I've lived and worked on this ship for 5 years. He nodded, remaining quiet in her mind long enough that she missed his voice. "You compartmentalize," he said. "Excuse me?" "I've heard humans have noisy minds. I don't hear anything except this conversation." "And thank Goddess for that." "Yes, I do compartmentalize. A conduit requires a static-free workplace. We're trained from an early age to shield our noisy minds." Focusing on something other than the intoxicating smell and the feel of Nadish would be good right now. The waterfall wasn't much help. Where were the others? Her fellow conduit, Corina, should have arrived by now. Eva looked at the door hopefully. "Are conduits able to examine others' thoughts?" "No." Aware of concerns over broad-spectrum and investigative telepathic abilities, she rushed to reassure him. "No, I can only receive what is directed at me." Eva squeezed his arm. "Nothing more." Jan, Vice President of Operations, breezed into the room. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting." A chastised Arjun followed close on her heels. Apparently, upper management thought Arjun had lost too much ground yesterday. Jan, a white-haired nonagenarian, would give the Tantarii a run for their money. Eva looked forward to the verbal sparring. Govad, shorter and broader than Nadish, bulldozed past the IR executives. He chirruped, a sound that didn't match his bullish form, and whooped down onto his stool. The scent of oranges trailed him. "Now see, that's a pleasant scent." Eva scowled at Nadish. "What?" Nadish tilted his head. Blanking her features, she shook her head. "Sorry, nothing." Corina had a reverb headache. "How are you feeling, Eva?" Jan, never one to worry about personal space, lifted Eva's eyelid and leaned forward to take a closer look. "Your pupils look good. Tired? Headachy? Anything I should know about?" "I'm fine," Eva said aloud, jerking her head back. "Just fine." "I tried to get another conduit, but everyone's booked. Nadish, I apologize for the delay. We must postpone, of course, until someone else is available." "I can host 3 of you," Eva said aloud. The amount of concentration and energy to translate and hold space for all 3 of them in her working mind should mute her personal mind. Eva almost sagged in relief. "That isn't a problem." "Excellent!" Jan rubbed her hands together briskly. Eva wondered if Arjun or Govad would be left out of today's session. Trills and chirps passed between the Tantarii as Nadish updated Govad. Their language sounded like birdsong to Eva. The other Tantarii rose and elbowed Arjun aside. "So, the 4 of us will all hold arms?" Nadish asked Eva. Imagining everyone seated around the table, holding hands like participants in a 19th century seance, Eva shook her head. "No, that won't work. The person not touching me would get too much feedback and static. The strain of trying to hear everyone would give them a headache. Everyone has to touch me." The Tantarii could each hold an arm, and Jan could rest her hands upon Eva's shoulders. The older woman might get tired of standing if the talks continued too long, but she'd endure. Eva wished she'd worn a loose-collared shirt. She could always go change, if necessary. Nadish spoke aloud to Govad, his translated words washed over her mind. "Jan and you, my friend, can each hold on to Eva's arms. I'll stand behind her. I can wrap an arm around her abdomen easily enough." He looked at Eva. "If that is acceptable." Had he heard her? No. Eva probed her shield. Not likely. Her belly? He could drape his arm over her shoulders. The image of his long limbs extending over her bare shoulders and trailing down to rest against her breasts made her nipples tighten and sent her heart rate into overdrive once more. Calm, calm, calm. Belly or shoulders? Oh, dear goddess. Belly it is. Yes, that's acceptable. Relinquishing his stool to Govad, Nadish moved behind Eva. She untucked her shirt, inhaling sharply as satin wrapped around her stomach and back. Her heart shuddered while each suction point coupled. Heat bloomed in her lower belly. Oh, this might not be a good idea. Her thighs clenched together, a keen throb detonating between them. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Her mind scurried to batten down her shield. "Eva, are you well?" he asked. Yes. Her voice fractured on the simple response. "For the love of all that is holy, get a grip on yourself." "Yes." she repeated, sounding stronger. His chuckle in her mind made her sit up straight. Mortified, she demanded, "What?" "Nothing. My apologies. Your hair, tickles me." "Oh, sorry." She swept her hand over the tight curls, flattening them momentarily. They sprang back, brushing against Nadish once again. "Your hair is lovely." Thank you." Under control again, Eva sighed. Jan and Eva, forearms overlapping, wrapped their fingers around each other's upper arm. "Sorry, my hands are cold," Jan said. "You're quite warm. Are you sure you're feeling all right?" "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure." Govad's arm, with its shades of gold, black, and dark green, curled around hers as Nadish's had. His touch wasn't as cool as Jan's, but it felt far cooler than Nadish's. When Govad's suckers adhered to her skin, she felt nothing. She relaxed, settling into work. Her mind focused on the trio's negotiations. Jan immediately pounced on one of Arjun's concessions. Eva saw Arjun grimace. Though her synapses were on overdrive, Eva watched, fascinated by the speed and deftness displayed by Jan and Nadish. 2 hours in, her control faltered. Her awareness homed in on the welcome heavy weight coiled around her waist. Imagined Nadish's arm gliding lower. Steady, professional, focus. Nadish made an offhand comment, drawing her attention back. Had he just tried to make a joke? The odd timing and stiff delivery halted the discussion. Govad gave Nadish a startled side-eye. Jan offered a polite chuckle and, looking to Eva, raised a sculpted brow. His distraction quieted her mind, and the pause in negotiations gave Eva a much-needed break. The second time she felt her control falter, Nadish again threw out another sad excuse of a joke. Govad gaped at him as if Nadish had sprouted another head. The barest of frown lines creased the vice president's forehead. The brief silence in Eva's mind was bliss. It seemed an eternity before Jan said, "Gentlemen, I believe we shall break here. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow." After a polite "thank you," Govad released Eva first. He clasped Nadish's back, bowed to Jan, and lumbered away. Jan stood and stretched. 2 loud pops resonated through the room. She laughed, massaging her lower back. An excellent session. "Sorry, time got away from me." Jan patted Eva's hand. "Always a pleasure working with you. Get a massage. Get some rest." Glancing over her shoulder, she said, "Arjun." Arjun peeled himself off the wall and followed her out. Eva inhaled Nadish's intoxicating scent. She willed herself not to burrow back against him. She tensed in preparation for Nadish leaving, not ready to lose that connection. She wiggled her toes. His arm remained around her. Interlacing her fingers, she stretched her arms. A thread of worry squiggled behind her mental shield. Placing her hands on Nadish's arm, she asked, "How did you know I needed breaks?" "Your heart rate increases and your muscles tighten." "Ah." Restlessly, she brushed her thumb back and forth over his dark skin. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Get up before you make a fool of yourself." She should go back to her room, take a hot bath, drink some wine. She rotated her neck and heard it pop. "We kept you still for hours. Your muscles must ache. I don't wish to offend, but I could massage your neck and shoulders," Nadish offered. Hot bath, wine, or Nadish? Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Lean forward. Eva complied, still grasping his arm around her waist. Two extremities rubbed circles on either side of her spine, while two more worked on the knots in her neck and shoulders. Is the pressure all right? He asked. Perfect, she groaned, canting her head to the left as he dug into a particularly tight spot. Heat radiated off him and seeped into her muscles. She closed her eyes and absorbed every touch. A separate heat trickled down her throat, her breasts, her belly, her thighs. Eva squirmed, swallowing hard. Professional. Her muscles loosened under his ministrations. Tension from sitting so long flowed away, while a new tension ratcheted up within her. She ached to touch more of him. She wanted to invite him back to her quarters. The desire to taste him consumed her. A dream fragment spooled out. On her knees, tangled in his tentacles, licking the swirls of his blue and green skin. Eva clenched her thighs in response. Eva? Nadish's voice sounded strained. Shield? Eva's eyes snapped open. Dear goddess, he's seen. Nadish, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Embarrassment and guilt engulfed her. She struggled to stand, her thumbs prying her skin free from his hold. The chair ricocheted off of him and rolled sideways. Crap, crap, crap! Eva nearly fell, but he caught her. That was unprofessional. I apologize. I didn't mean to project. Eva, my shield. His shield? Project? You mean my shield? Eva stood facing him now. Nadish? I haven't lost control of my shield since, well, I apologize. He stepped back, giving her space. Nadish retracted his extremities, but Eva caught hold of a tentacle. He thought the flash was his? Was it his? No, definitely hers. Silence. He stared at a point just over her head. If he thought they were his, she had an out. Eva could leave before she embarrassed herself further. But she wanted to own up to it being hers. Oh, not professional at all. What if he took offense? If that happened, she could kiss her job goodbye. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. She should apologize again and leave. But what if he felt the same way she did? Eva would regret letting this moment go. What if... That came straight out of last night's dream. Eva shifted from foot to foot, watching him warily. I didn't intend for it to slip out. Silence. Nadish? Eva touched his face and lifted up onto her toes, trying to get in his line of sight. So, you've been having racy thoughts, too? Her stomach rolled with anxiety. Screw professional, please say yes. A long moment passed. Then, perhaps. Nadish peered down at her. Settling back onto her heels, Eva snorted. Well, apparently, we have the same thoughts. She reached out to hold another tentacle. I think we should compare our imaginations. Eva looked at the door. I know how to input the privacy settings and lock that door. Want to share? Yes. Eva released him to dash over to the control panel. Her fingers flew over the component. She widened her brown eyes for a retinal scan, hoping the conference room hadn't been booked for anything else today. She tried to keep the shake out of her voice as she called out her ID code and breathed a sigh of relief when the system acknowledged the change in settings. Already opening her shell, she spun around and knocked into Nadish. Eva gripped his upper shoulders to steady herself. "Ready?" "Ready." A cascade of images and words rippled through her mind, leaving her breathless. Nadish swayed under the avalanche of Eva's musings. Holding one sent from him tightly in her mind, Eva said, "I want to try this." She thrust the picture back to show him. "May we?" "If we can try this." Nadish pushed one back for her inspection. "Yes." Eva nodded enthusiastically. "Goddess, yes!" Impatience prodded her. "Wrap an arm around me." Barely waiting for him to do so, she kicked off her shoes and gripped the hem of her shirt. "Eva, please. Slow. Please." "Slow, huh? Okay." Her fingers caressed the hard planes of his chest, skimming over his upper and lower shoulders. She wished she had an extra set of hands. Eva went up on tiptoe and nuzzled his neck. Eager to taste, her lips parted. A long, slow lick along his jaw earned her a growl. Fruity sweetness with a slight tang burst over her tongue. She inhaled deeply. His delectable pheromones buzzed her senses. Rubbing her cheek against the crook of his neck, she purred. Nadish used his suckers to gather up her shirt, raising it inch by inch. Her aching breasts fell free from the inset bandeau. Cool air whisked over her exposed skin, and she shivered. His tentacles explored every inch of her as he removed the garment. "Oh, you're so soft," he whispered. Heat radiated from him, warming her palms, her questing fingers. The texture of his skin fascinated her. So smooth, and yet, when she pressed her nails into him, the skin didn't even dimple. Eva tipped her head to study his face. Her hand lifted to graze his cheek. Nadish nipped her fingers with his beak. "Step back. I want to see." Eva reluctantly eased away, letting her hands glide down his tentacles. Beautiful. Nadish's green-gray eyes widened. His gaze latched onto her breasts. The tip of a tentacle traced around her dark areola. Her nipple puckered. His touch, light as a feather, stroked the underneath side of each breast. Another tentacle played over her ribs. Shuddering out of breath, Eva moved to unbutton her slacks. "Wait. Slow." He lifted each breast, molding them and drawing tiny circles around her erect nipples. Slow drove her crazy. "How about you take these off?" Eva caught hold of an arm and guided it to the waistband of her trousers. "Yes." Using a row of suckers to grip the fabric, he struggled to undo the button. His facial muscles quivered as he tugged. Twisting the cloth, he tugged some more. "Want some help?" No, I've just about got it." Finally, he let go. "I can cut it off with my beak." "Oh, I'm sure you can, but here." She flicked the button and shimmied. The slacks swooshed to the floor. Nadish brushed a tentacle over her stomach, while another rasped the lace edge of her panties. Or was that one an arm? Goddess, she didn't care. She just wanted more. Nadish She wiggled her hips. "Take these off." The lace and silk glided down. His tentacles skated up her inner thighs, making her muscles quiver. Her breath quickened. She lifted one foot, then the other, freeing herself from the tangle of panties and slacks. Nadish fondled the arch of her foot, playing with her toes. Eva giggled and, using her other foot, pushed at his tentacle. The arm around her waist tightened, and another arm circled around her hips, lifting her to continue his sensuous torture of both feet now. She laughed and squealed in turns, kicking her feet, trying to evade the tickling. Goosebumps and desire raced along the path of his suckers as they whispered across her body. She yipped when her bare ass touched down on the cool quartz table. Eva hadn't realized he'd walked them over to it. She leaned back, propping herself up on forearms. "We have no diseases that can affect humans. Are you fertile?" Eva paused, her brain scrambling to process. "I have a vaginal seal for microbes and a birth control implant. We're good." He played with her breasts. His suckers latched onto her nipples, tugging and twisting. Tentacles skated over her belly, her shoulders, up her throat. She felt the smooth glide of an arm over her pussy. Her arousal coated his arm and her inner thighs. Eva moaned when he deployed his suckers. Dozens of mouths coupled with her swollen lips, spreading her, exploring. The multiple overwhelming sensations threatened to drown her in pleasure. Eva shrieked when a sucker captured her clitoris. Small to and fro movements with his arm left her panting. The tip of an arm ghosted over her lips. She sucked it into her mouth. Eagerly drawing him in deeper, she rolled her tongue around and around. Yet another tentacle gathered up her juices and slipped back to her ass, wetting her rim. It pressed and probed there, sending sparks up her spine. How many arms was Nadish using? Didn't he need at least 2 to stand? A seismic cresting wave loomed up within her body. Her muscles coiled tight as her mind spun wild. Head falling back, Eva released the tentacle in her mouth and cried out his name as she climaxed. Bucking within the confines of his tentacles, she rode out her orgasm. Moving with a speed that astonished Eva, Nadish flipped her. She rested on her hands and knees. Head bowed, she waited in anticipation as little quakes echoed through her core. Her thighs were clamped together by the embrace of one arm. Eva squirmed. There was no give in his hold. Against each outer hip, she felt the smooth glide of a tentacle. They arrowed up her belly, looped around each breast to harness them, and the tips gripped her shoulders. Eva looked over her shoulder. This one definitely came from his imagination, and she liked it. She grinned. His facial muscles quivered again into his version of a smile. She looked down, and her eyes flared wide. She felt her jaw drop. His red, engorged cock jutted high. Her fantasies hadn't done him justice. Holy crap. Wow, Nadish. Just... wow. Nadish's standing tentacles lengthened, their circumferences narrowing as he rose, gaining the height he required. He eased his cock between her cinched thighs, slicking himself with her cream. She felt him playing with her rosette, a narrow-tipped tentacle sliding in as she bore down. Shivers danced along her spine. Eva wriggled in his grasp. So much better than my dreams. Mine too, Nadish said. The head of his cock sank into her vagina, and he growled. He worked himself into her, sinking in one delicious, thick inch at a time. He ground out a word Eva couldn't translate. Eva bowed her head. Her belly fluttered. The muscles in her arms and legs vibrated. She felt lightheaded. "Breathe, Eva." "Oh, yeah?" she gasped. The walls of her vagina stretched to accommodate him. Nadish rocked back and forth, the slow drag driving her insane. "I'm good, Nadish. Please, please, please move." She rapped her knuckles on the table, emphasizing each please. He leaned over her and picked up the pace. Her nostrils flared, drawing in his aroma and the musk of her own body. The muscular tentacles around her breasts squeezed in rhythm to his strokes. The tentacle in her ass slowly dragged out, then pushed back in. Eva didn't think her eyes could pop open any further, but they did. His cock tapped out a demanding beat against her cervix. It wasn't uncomfortable, exactly. The unfamiliar sensation detonated contractions deeper within her pelvis. Tiny kisses alternated with pinches. Every inch of her skin felt a flame. Her body vibrated with need. More, Nadish, more. He held her tight. Her body rocked with the force of his thrusts. Eva could feel the wobble of her ass cheeks, the sway of her heavy breasts. Each tug from the suckers adhered to her skin sent another cascade of pleasure through her. Her sheath contracted. A lazy, slow swirl of desire spiraled up, hovering, waiting. The end of the tentacle binding her thighs slithered down and rubbed circles around her clit. "Eva, I don't think. Go, baby." He pounded into her. Another orgasm seized Eva, and she screamed. Nadish grunted, his cock pulsing deep within her. Her cunt rippled with aftershocks long after he finally stopped moving. Eva's arms gave out, and she rested her forehead on the table. Nadish rested his cheek on her shoulder. The weight of him pressed atop her felt delicious. They panted in unison. The table scooted a little when he pushed himself upright. Nadish uncoiled his appendages from her, then began massaging and petting her. Feeling a little woozy, Eva sighed and sagged down fully onto the tabletop. Its cool surface felt good against her overheated body. Her once turbulent mind had simmered down into quiescence. Nadish gathered her up, pulling her into his arms. Eva traced nonsensical patterns on his chest. "We should go out to my room." Her words came out slurred. She licked her lips, then cleared her throat before continuing. "Work through some more of our fantasies." "Excellent idea." He maneuvered her to the door and picked up her panties. "Maybe we should both have rebound headaches tomorrow." "Reverb headaches," Eva corrected. She shivered as he slid the lace and silk garment up her legs. "Spend all night and day in bed. We have a lot of options to try out." Nadish chuckled. "That might work out well for us. Govad has no subtlety." He lowered her to the ground, holding her as she teetered, then steadied. "Jan and Arjun will be worn out from his pugilistic nature, and they'll beg to give us that docking station." "In your dreams, Jan won't be fazed by him in the least." She accepted her trousers from him. "You aren't serious, are you? I mean, about skipping tomorrow's meeting?" "Maybe. No." His voice trailed off. Eva rolled her eyes when she realized her breasts had distracted him. The meeting tomorrow. Oh boy. Her mind was quiet now, but tomorrow? I've got some jokes you can use tomorrow. Jokes? Nadish blinked slowly, canting his head. Are you well? He reached to lift her eyelid as Jan had. Eva smacked his tentacle away. I hate when she does that. Yes, jokes. I may need a little of your assistance tomorrow with my mental shell, in case my shield gets wobbly, remembering us. You didn't like my jokes? You might need some new material. Her shield would hold. It would. But having a backup plan wouldn't hurt. Are we going to stand here and chatter? Nadish tapped the tip of her nose. No, we're going to your room to negotiate. Negotiate what? She slipped on her shirt and turned to the control panel. Whose fantasy we try first? Eva rubbed her hands together and grinned. Excellent.
And that's our story. Over on the Patreon campaign this month, we're welcoming new supporter Ramon. In addition to my abiding gratitude, Patreon supporters are receiving 2 chapters a month of the 3rd volume of the Monster Whisperer series, titled Monster Whisperer 3rd Person. The first book of this series is currently available on Audible, and the second, Monster Whisperer 2nd Class, will be coming later this year. For the time being, it is still available in the Patreon campaign archives. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.
Novad gaped as it. Govad. Your muscles must ache.